As I said earlier, we've investigated the same evidence that the DoDIG did, and we came up with a totally different conclusion based on the evidence and the facts that we found in the sworn testimonies that there was a purposeful delay by the Department of Defense to deploy the DC National Guard. Then Army Chief of Staff's testimony revealed confusion regarding certain entries in the Army's timeline, but an individual within Secretary McCarthy's inner circle, but this was not included in the DoDIG's report. So what's happened is we've got people within the Pentagon testifying one thing to Congress and another thing into the DoDIG in their sworn testimonies. A witness who was with McCarthy on that day testified that the DC National Guard did not get specific instructions from the Army until after 5 p.m. The DoDIG report acknowledged this inconsistency, but still maintained in its report that McCarthy himself conveyed the order at 3:05. So DoDIG reports that the order was given at 3:05 to General Walker. General Walker just did not deploy, even though all of the testimony in the sworn affidavits or the sworn depositions and transcribed interviews all say that that communication never happened, but the DoDIG still reports that it does. I do know that one DoDIG investigator claimed to Major General Walker that getting to the bottom of why was not in their lane. So the DoDIG is telling General Walker, it's not in their lane to figure out why you weren't communicated to. They went on to say they don't judge operational decisions. The IG only looks at whether a law was broken or a policy was violated. But those are operational decisions. Well, that's fine, except for why does your report say that it was the DC National Guard that failed to deploy when it was clear through all the records that there was a purposeful delay within the DoD? As a result of my investigation, it's clear that the Pentagon and the DoDIG deliberately attempted to cover up the actions of certain senior DoD officials that day. DoDIG was tasked with evaluating the Department of Defense's response on January 6. However, the Department of Defense Office of the Secretary of Defense began exerting its influence in order to manipulate the report to protect senior DoD officials who failed President Trump on that day and failed Congress. As we've seen quite often, the cover-up is worse than the crime itself. Although the Department of Defense IG touts its independence and ability to produce unbiased reports, the evidence obtained by my subcommittee shows that the former IG produced a flawed report with many inaccuracies that violate investigative standards. The Department of Defense IG failed to interview key personnel, specifically the DC National Guard personnel, with firsthand knowledge, and failed to conduct complete interviews focused on facts instead of seeking witnesses to affirm the Pentagon's predetermined narrative. As part of the cover-up, the IG report invented phone calls between senior leaders that never occurred, where both parties allegedly on the call denied that it ever took place. Now, these are people that testified to the DoDIG that they never made those calls, but yet their report reflects that they did. And worst of all, the IG report chose to protect Pentagon leadership at the expense of members of the National Guard, our volunteer men and women who were ready and waiting less than 2 miles from this Capitol with their riot gear, ready to come and help Chief Sund. The subcommittee has been seeking the truth despite efforts of the Department of Defense to obstruct and hide the evidence.